Hello, welcome to another World of UX podcast. I'm your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. Special welcome to those of you that are joining us for the very first time. Got a little bit of a different look going on here today, so we're sort of playing around with this, and hope you like it, for what that's worth. But thanks for taking the time to join us on today. We are going to cover another topic today that I think some people may find of interest. It's something that does come up from time to time, and I had a speaking engagement with the XM Global collaboration this past week. No, I'm not going back to the talk circuit. I'm not going to share a recording of that talk today. I'm going to talk to you directly today about a topic that came up, and at the moment that it came up, well, wow, this will be great, I think, to share some thoughts on this with the World of UX audience. Someone asked the question, how do you define UX? And I did a talk that was basically talking about the fundamentals of UX. And within that talk, I spent some time talking about what UX is not. Then I spent some time talking about what UX is. And in the process of doing that, we wanted to uproot some things, because a lot of people have conceptions about UX that, face it, folks, I talk about it all the time. There was no misinformation in UX prior to 2011, and now it's everywhere. Everywhere you go, we're being bombarded. There are people who just share something for the sake of sharing something. There are people who just talk about things because they just want to be seen and they want a following and they want people to engage with them on their social media posts. A lot of people aren't thinking about the quality. They're not thinking about the impact that has, the detrimental impact, particularly that has on the discipline at large. So at any rate, person was asking the question about it. And part of the reason that the person was asking the question, because they were a little surprised at the definition that I shared of UX. And they brought up a very high profile, popular, famous, if you will, resource and how they defined UX. And so I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to share a ton of definitions with you tonight about UX and share, in a sense, part of the answer that I gave the other day, and then I'm going to build on it. Isn't it interesting? Have you ever thought about the fact that when you look up the definition of a word in a dictionary, have you ever thought about how interesting it is that you can find 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 definitions of a particular word in the dictionary? Isn't that interesting? And people have no problem with that. When it comes to UX, a lot of times, and the person didn't do this, I encounter this quite a bit. So I'm going to sort of summarize and bring a lot of different things in addressing this topic on tonight. When it comes to UX, a lot of people want one definition. Isn't that interesting? How people want to constrain defining UX, but when it comes to other words, you can have a ton of different definitions. You can have a ton of different synonyms, and nobody has a problem with that. UX, folks, as a discipline, we're roughly a little over 30 years old as we know UX today. Was not called UX at first. I've been had people come at me with regard to that, because frankly, some people just want to fight. They don't want to engage in an actual adult conversation. They just want to pick fights. We all know that UX was not a commonly used acronym in the 1990s. Well, a lot of us do. And especially if you were around at that time, you know that UX did not become a commonly used acronym until roughly 2008, 2009. That's when you started to see it, and it really settled in, and it became the way that you referred to the discipline in about 2010, 2011. It wasn't until then that it happened, ironically, about the same time that the siege started, but we're not going to get into that tonight. I talked about my own challenge, and I've talked about it before on this show. I did not know how to define UX for years. I had such a difficult time. I knew how to do the work, And I was scratching my head a lot in the beginning, and I was doing a lot of learning like a lot of people do. And that's to be expected. But I did not know how to define UX. I could not confidently and, in my opinion, accurately define what UX was until I had actually been doing this work for about 15 years. And there were so many moving targets, there were so many different things going on. It was very difficult to try to make sense out of what we were when it came to explaining it to somebody, especially if they were outside of the discipline. And I'm sure a lot of other people, I've talked to a ton of people who had the same challenge. Today, I don't have a problem defining what UX is. I accept the moniker because that's what UX is. It's a moniker. It's not one thing. I talk about that a lot, especially when I'm doing my talk on what UX is. But there's something that happens in defining UX, and that's the topic. That's actually what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about overcoming the ambiguity of defining UX today. It's critical to our discipline that we accomplish that. It's critical to our discipline that practitioners are able to accurately and confidently define the discipline, because in so doing, we carry ourselves as ambassadors, and we're all ambassadors of the discipline, whether you like it or not, whether you're comfortable with that or not, whether you feel you're good at it or not. Everybody who occupies space in this discipline is an ambassador of this discipline. And we have a responsibility to represent this discipline properly, ethically, professionally. UX maturity is dependent upon it. Our teams are dependent upon it. Getting support from people in leadership is dependent upon it. And a lot of times people are just doing things that really muddy the waters even further. All of this UX, UI stuff that people do, that really keeps people, you're not going to find people in those circles that can accurately define what UX is, because when they say UX, UI, they're actually already saying that UX is not what it really is, because that's not it. We're going to take some time to address that in the coming weeks, because it just needs to be addressed again. And there are more and more people that are using that combo acronym, and they're doing a lot of damage, and they have no idea that they're doing that damage. And a lot of people, they hear it so much that they think that it's true. They think it's accurate. They think it's viable, and it is not. Some people, they completely cast me off because I'm constantly saying that UX is not UI. And then I explain why. And it's interesting, as we talked about recently, it's one thing to disagree, another to claim you disagree, another thing to disavow. But in the midst of all of that, when people say that they disagree, they can't say that what you're saying isn't true, because they can't. They know it's not true. And so a lot of times when people say they disagree, they're actually saying they don't like what you're saying. And to say that you don't like what somebody's saying, when what somebody's saying is backed up by data, is backed up by facts, that's pretty worthless. So UX, really, we're so dependent upon critical thinking. We're so dependent upon grounding ourselves in facts. And so at any rate, we want to talk about how to overcome the ambiguity. And to do this, I want to point out a few things here tonight. I want to point out a few things, and we're going to take a little bit of a journey. And one of the other things, I'm going to illustrate this shortly. One of the other things I mentioned when I was answering that question the other night at the talk in Ho Chi Minh is that I mentioned it earlier, there's multiple definitions. And I told the person and the attendees, there is no one definition of UX. As you're about to see, there are a lot of definitions, and I mixed up some good ones and some not so good ones. I'll point those out to make sure nobody runs away with the wrong mindset. But there are a lot of definitions that are viable. Just as when you look up a word in a definition or in the dictionary and you see multiple definitions, the same thing applies to UX. There are multiple definitions, and there is one really, really key aspect that I'll talk about momentarily that is another reason why. The same way that when you look at definitions in a dictionary, I'm sort of jumping ahead of myself. I'm going to do it anyway. When you look at definitions in a dictionary, the variance between one definition to another is often based on context. And the same thing applies to UX. And even no matter what context you're speaking about, when you're talking about UX, a lot of times you can have 5, 6, 7, 8 definitions about one particular context, and that's fine. And they all fit. And they all sort of give you an extra perspective. They all add a little bit more spice, if you will, a little bit more clarity, which makes them all viable, which makes them all worth embracing. So, but we're going to deal with this topic on today. Want to make sure that we want to make things as clear as possible. We want to help people to not be so gung-ho about having one particular definition. You don't have to have one definition, and we're going to explain why, and we're going to show you why the bad definitions need to be discarded. But let's go ahead and jump in. Now, to start off this little journey, I want to talk about ambiguity. That's part of what we're talking about overcoming. Here's a definition associated with the issues about ambiguous words. And by the way, when I get into these definitions, I'm not going to tell you where I got them from. You're going to recognize one because you've heard it a lot, but on this particular show. But I'm not going to tell you the source because the source will add bias. So you don't want to hear where it came from. You want to judge it for what it is. If it's viable, it's viable. If it's not viable, it's not viable. I am going to call out, as mentioned, one or two definitions that are actually not good because I want to point some things out with it. But at any rate, ambiguous words, and UX is an ambiguous term. Why? Because it has more than one meaning. Not just because people don't understand what UX is. UX has more than one meaning. You can have 100 different definitions, and it does not make any of them incorrect. And we need to embrace that. Matter of fact, not only can you look up one word in a dictionary and see several definitions, what happens when you look at several dictionaries? And a lot of those definitions, they don't agree with one another, but it doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them inaccurate. And so in trying to achieve that common ground of peace within UX, within the discipline, we need to understand and embrace that. There is no one definition. Think about the context. Apply the context. Embrace the definition based on the context. You switch the context, the definition changes. And again, you're going to see that here momentarily. At any rate, if a word is in isolation or if the sentence cannot clarify the ambiguity, that word remains ambiguous. So they're talking about basically what's behind all of this, and that is context. Context. See, I was going to mention this. I mentioned it earlier. Who cares? Context is key. It's so important. And so let's get into some of these different definitions. Again, some are good, some are not so good. And then I'll mention one that I didn't include here because I couldn't find an actual definition, but people mention it a lot. So I'm going to throw it in here anyway. But let's begin. So first one, user experience, UX design, is the process design teams use to create products that provide meaningful and relevant experiences to users. And then they add a little bit of commentary behind that. And I thought it would be good to include UX design involves the design of the entire process of acquiring and integrating the product, including aspects of branding, design, usability, and function. Now, I'm going to give a little commentary here. Thumbs up from me on this one. This is, if you use this in any given setting, it's going to work, but please note the context. This particular definition is talking about UX design as a discipline. It's talking about everything that entails doing the work. And that's one of the places where people sort of lose it, because when you're trying to define UX, think about who you're talking to. Think about what part of UX you're talking about, because as you'll see, when you change the context, this definition doesn't work. This is talking about somebody that's actually doing the work. It's not talking about, for example, user experience as it pertains to the customer, as it pertains to the user. That definition is different. It's completely different. but it's still user experience. I mean, look at this. User experience, often shortened to UX, refers to the overall experience a customer or user has when interacting with a product, system, or service. And it wasn't very descriptive, but at the same time, it's showing you a different context. So this is important. It takes all the user's feelings. You see these definitions about feelings a lot. It doesn't make it wrong, but this is talking about the customer. User experience as it pertains to the customer, not as it pertains to me and the work I do every day, the work that you do every day. It's not talking about that, but it's relevant because we are concerned about their perceptions, their feelings, their sentiment, their mental models when it comes to gauging how to better do our job. So again, not irrelevant, but this is not a textbook definition of UX as it pertains to the discipline. It's limited to, as it says here, the customer. The customer. UX takes all the user's feelings about the product or service, including ease of use, accessibility, visual design, functions of the user interface, and the emotional impact of using the product to then make an assessment. See, and now it's talking about doing the work again. It actually flipped context right within the statement. The definition is not wrong, and they try to be very holistic by the time you get to the end. But folks, the context changes. So this definition, it works, but it doesn't work depending upon who you're talking to, who you're talking about. So something to keep in mind. Let's look at another one. User experience design, UX, is a way of thinking about your product or service differently. So see, it's already talking about from the perspective of the professional. It is a human-centered perspective that puts the needs of people at the center of an iterative problem-solving approach. Well done. UX design isn't about pushing your solutions onto your users. It's about building what your users actually need to accomplish their goals. Sound definition, but again, the context is focusing on the people doing the work. So well done, as long as you keep the context in mind. This is one of those bad ones. This one is really way off. It's way off, no matter what context you're looking at it. They say user experience is a relatively new area in libraries. UX isn't new, okay? It's as librarians realize the great extent to which our online presence is a library branch, and that the paths users take to information can be positive or frustrating. UX is not limited to librarians, folks. So you can, I don't even remember where I got this from, but I just thought it was hilarious, and I thought it would be worth sharing as we talk about this. And the thing is, when you see the internet's a beautiful thing, but anybody can publish anything, and a lot of times there's nobody there to say, don't say that. Do not embrace this definition. There's nothing new about UX. It's been around for 30 years as we know it, and the foundational elements of UX trace back to the early 1900s. So, and some people have even said into the late 1800s. So, and when if you really want to get extremely technical, it goes back centuries. But as we know it, it only dates back to the early 1900s. And yeah, I would have to agree with some when they say that late 1800s as well. There were people who would study different aspects of an experience and try to come up with ways to improve upon it. And then they documented it. And we have all this stuff on record. But when the digital world came into play, when that became a thing in the mid 90s, that's when the work that we do started to take off. There were even some people, because remember, UX, it's grounded in and was birthed out of human computer interaction. Human computer interaction. There's a whole lot of different types of experience-oriented strategies. Information architecture became a thing and started to be addressed in the mid 1970s. So, which was something that was a huge foundational aspect of what we now know as user experience, to the extent that many of the people in the discipline early on were referred to as information architects. So please keep these historical facts in mind when you think about the discipline. But again, this definition, if I don't have my sound effects plugged in right now, but oh my God, this one really deserves a sound effect. But yeah, skip this one. Don't use this one when you're trying to help somebody understand what UX is. Uh, this definition says UX is an approach that allows your users to navigate your website or app without confusion and with ease, providing a smooth experience of your brand. Um, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down simultaneously on this one. Is UX an approach that allows you to optimize the experience? Yes. Is it limited to websites and apps? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, folks, UX is not. In the earlier days, of course, there were no digital experiences in 1910, but we have record of people studying folks on assembly lines with the first automobiles to doing ethnographic studies to help optimize the production of automobiles. That's some of that early UX oriented work that was done that we do today, still based on those foundational principles. So it's not limited to this. This was one of the ones. Little thumbs up, little thumbs down on this one, because of that, because it's sort of pigeonholing what UX is. So, but is it an approach that you take? Yeah, it absolutely is an approach that we take to get the work done. So let us keep that in mind today. This is the one that you hear a lot around here. I mention it here on this show often. UX refers to the set of methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables a UX professional employs to find the sweet spot between user goals, business goals, and various types of constraints. And this is very similar to the first definition that we shared with you on tonight. Solid definition. Again, it's looking at things from the practitioner's perspective. This is not, do we consider, matter of fact, all the different methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables are going to take those feelings, those sentiments and mental models into account. So that's the research aspect of what we do. So this is a very holistic definition, but again, lots and lots and lots of context revolving around how we define UX. But don't allow yourself to be one of those people that's just looking at one definition of UX. There is no one definition of UX, but just look at, when you see a definition of UX, look at the context, because the context says everything. If you're talking about the user experience that a customer is going to experience, different animal. If you're talking about doing the work, different animal. And then but that definition associated with those of us that are doing the work is going to apply to more of the business aspects, the business related elements. And so keep that in mind as you look to define UX. And as you go forth in the discipline, when the better you can define the discipline, the better you can define UX, the better position you'll be in to represent it. Then there's a lot of people, they know, what do you do? I use methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables. I put all these things together. I select the best ones for what I'm working on, so that I can make sure that I'm acknowledging all the user needs, all the business needs, and any constraints we're dealing with, whether it's time, whether it's budget, whatever's going on from a constraint perspective, to make sure that we achieve wins for everybody involved. And we're trying to make things as easy to use as possible. And somebody said, okay, yeah, I understand that. People can relate to that. UX is not about feelings when it comes to doing the work, other than trying to gauge them. And then that has to be, you have to systematically identify those things. Don't ask people what they like. UX is not about what people like. It's about whether or not they can use something to accomplish their goals in a seamless and a frictionless manner as possible. That's when we're doing the work. UX is not, promise you I'd bring this one up. UX is not a mindset, folks. No. It's not a mindset. So don't say that. That is a gross oversimplification of what UX is, and misrepresents who we are. And when you misrepresent the discipline, you are basically handing it over to people who want to come and take it over. And there's a lot of people who want to take over our work, and they do not know how to do the work. Folks, when you've been doing this work for a while, UX is a science. When you're doing UI, not so much science there. Can science be applied to UI? Yeah, it can be. but predominantly it is not. It is many cases, and the vast majority of what's happening with UI, it is an expression a lot of times. That's why there's an art element that dominates UI. But when you're talking about ease, when you're talking about cognitive load, when you're talking about accessibility, a lot of different things and all the different factors that come into play with that, we're talking about the science, folks. And UX is art plus science, predominantly science, whereas visual design is predominantly art. So some people they'll beg to differ with me on that, but go and do the work and you'll find out that's exactly what it is, always has been. When you walk through an art museum, is it mostly aesthetic? Is it a visual appeal? Or is it science? And there's some science. If you study art the right way, you'll see the science in it, and it's a beautiful thing. But somebody just walks up to a canvas and they take a can of paint and throw it up there and they let the paint drizzle where it may, and they put their name on the bottom of it and walk off. Done. You can accomplish, in other words, anybody can put together a user interface, and you don't have to use science to deploy an interface. Doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't mean it's going to meet the needs of the users. Doesn't mean that it's going to find the sweet spot between user needs, business needs, and constraints. UX is a science, folks. It is an infinite science where you got to have your head on a swivel and understand all the changing and moving mechanisms and understand how to navigate them. That's who we are, folks. That's what we do. Be good at defining what UX is. Be good at representing the discipline, and everybody will win. Folks, that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks for taking the time to join us on today. Don't forget to go out to the Kaizen Tees website if you want to go out and support the site and support the work that we're doing here with the t-shirts and the mugs, things of that nature. I'm not going to bring up the site today. Folks, you hear about it. It's down. And if you're looking at this on YouTube, it's down in the description. If you're listening to it on one of the different podcast sources, it's listed down there too. So you can see the Kaizen Tees link. Go ahead, check out our merchandise out there. Help us out. We thank you in advance for your support. And those of you who've been supporting us for a while, thank you for that. But that's all the time we have for today. Let's overcome the ambiguity of defining UX, folks. Let's be good at that. And so we can all win. But that's all the time we have for today. Gonna sign off here, folks. Until next time, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off and wishing everybody all the best. Until next time, happy UXing, everybody.